So if you don't already, you can follow us on Twitter or join us on Meetup to stay up to date on when we are putting together events. We meet typically about quarterly, so once every 3 months or so. I want to say thank you to Apprenda for lending us their space for the night and for sharing their drinks and getting us pizza. Thank you to O'Reilly Media who sent us some stuff we'll give away at the end, so hold on to that ticket you were given. And thank you to Brown. So if you want to hang out after this meetup, we're walking over to Brown and they're extending their happy hour for us. So if you don't know Dan, he's a UX designer here at Apprenda. He has a great talk put together and a little activity plan. I'm really looking forward to it. So please join me in welcoming Dan Romlein.
Thanks, Becca. Welcome to Apprenda. As Becca mentioned, I'm a user experience designer here on the product team. I sit back there in that bay. I'm jersey number 48, just around the corner there. And just a quick introduction to what we do, what happens here in the 4th floor of the Headley building in Troy. We are a platform as a service company. So the way I like to explain it is sort of like an operating system on a big scale for enterprise companies. The typical enterprise, Boeing is one of our customers, will run thousands of applications, and those applications go on servers, infrastructure. And Apprenda is a layer that sits between that infrastructure, the servers that are running those applications, and the applications themselves. So our kind of unofficial motto is the software behind the world software. So our goal is to help people write and deploy applications, specifically enterprises. And that's kind of us in a nutshell. Our value is that developers can write apps faster and move the wild faster. Housekeeping item, that's our Wi-Fi password. In case you're already on, we're at Apprenda, pretty much all social media. If you want to give us a shout out. And so my UX design here, we have a few portals, they're called, which are how developers and IT operators interact with their product. It's one way they can interact with the product. And so I will be pulled in to introduce new features, to do testing on those portals. And it is enterprise UX. I think Larry Burks, is Larry here? I can see. Okay, Larry at the last Albany UX Meetup spoke on the paradigm of enterprise UX and the challenges that it brings and the unique space that is to design for it. Things typically move slower than in consumer UX, that you're selling usually to someone who's different than the person that will be ultimately using your software, which is kind of an interesting problem to think about. And scale of things. You're providing a solution for an entire organization rather than just an individual. So that's the world I live in, and that's kind of where most of the thoughts in this talk came from. But I think my ideas will be general enough to kind of apply across, regardless of what type of products we're doing. So what we'll cover today, my core premise is that to come up with the most effective solutions you can, you need to figure out why. You need to dig down to the reasons behind your design, reasons why you're designing things. And in following my own advice, I'm going to start out here kind of laying a foundation of why I have this talk. Why get to the why, as it were. Stick with me. And this is really scratching my own itch. This is kind of the reason that I started thinking about this. It's an area I tend to struggle with in UX projects, is getting started with that first step to take. And then I was validated in that talking to other friends in the UX industry in the area, that yeah, this was part of the process that they struggled with. In found challenging. And it's not the most sexy part of the UX process. I feel like sometimes people want to talk about mock-ups, prototypes, and interactive things. And those very first steps you take could be a little more ambiguous around what direction are we taking. And it can be intimidating. It's a blank canvas, the blank sketch file. This could be anything, right? And at least for me, it can be a paralyzingly immense thing to consider. And finally, final reason that just getting started can be hard is there's so much jargon around, especially the first step in the UX process. And I'm someone who likes to do stuff by the books, and so I'll get in my head about, do we have a brief, but does that count as a PRD? And do we need to do a journey map, or is it a user map? And there's just so much. I mean, jargon is important, and industry terminology is important, but at a certain level, it can kind of cloud our ability to think clearly, I think. So in this talk, we'll try to stay mostly clear, anything too jargony, and get to the underlying principles that guide the first step of the process. All right, so as I mentioned, the core premise here is to start with a why, which shouldn't be too provocative. I think most people would agree with this. Number one reason, I think, is that otherwise stuff like this tends to happen. I think Dogberg is less often to blame than the team who built the product you're dealing with just having failed to ask why. I mean, some designers are truly bad as designers, but I think most of the time they just don't have a good direction that was established by asking why. And so a lot of people are probably familiar with this quote. My mom had it on the fridge when we were growing up. And there's a basic concept: if you don't know what you're aiming for, you're going to hit that target every time. That is to say, you're going to end up with something other than the ideal solution for your problem. And so those, I think, are two, or that one, this principle is fairly straightforward. So I'm going to dig into a little more this idea, establishing why unlocks creativity. I love creativity, and I love talking about creativity, so I'm going to use this as a chance to dig into that a little bit. And I think in UX design, creativity sometimes gets a bad rap. It's misunderstood. And I think it's still very valuable. So there's the perception sometimes that this is creative. When people hear creative, they think flashy, exuberant, bright colors, glowing line chart, and this is not going to fly with JP Morgan Chase. And that's okay. I think creativity can also be found in solutions like this, which is still a consumer product. It's kind of on the line between the two consumer enterprises. This is Google Keep. And they've decided to hide icons until you actually hover over the card desktop, which is very elegant and sleek, and I would say creative. So I think creative has a real important part to play in the UX design process. And I love this definition of creativity. Creativity is coming up with original ideas that have value. And the first half, the original part, to the extent that we can come up with original ideas. I mean, it's kind of a remix, but to the extent that we can come up with original ideas, I think most people get that part of creativity. Brainstorming, being artsy. But it's the second half that have value that really relies on establishing why first. And I was describing this to a friend, and they're like, yeah, it's kind of like, I think about it, you need to have your input, and then creativity happens, and then you have your output. and this is an engineer, go figure. But I really like this representation that you can't just be creative in a vacuum. You don't just walk up to a comedian and say, hey, tell me a joke, right? If they've got an input that they're working from to be creative, to then have that creative result with that the value piece established. This is just some data around creativity more generally becoming important. It's a little bit outdated, 2010, but IBM conducted a study, and they found that creativity was the #1 leadership characteristic for CEOs to have. Does anyone know, there are a number of factors, but does anyone know what the big driving factor was for this versus, say, 25, 50 years ago? The importance of creativity. Technology. So the rate of technological change that my nieces and nephews are going to have jobs that likely don't exist today. And so it makes it hard to educate them for those outside of enduringly evergreen skills like creativity. So creativity as it relates to UX design is becoming more and more important in business. And it's a great time to be a designer, to be a UX designer. This is from the Design Management Institute. And over the past, from 2012 to 2015, they tracked over 200% gap between design-centric companies. They have a really interesting list of characteristics of those companies on their site you can check out, versus Standard & Poor's 500 companies. And a lot of this is because of this. The how of building software is largely solved. Now it's a question of what do we build and why are we building it. And this is a little idealistic. We're not quite there, right? That software just snap your fingers and you get the product that you want. There's still a lot of work that happens, right? But it is getting easier. And products like Apprenda, shameless plug, are kind of driving that transition. PaaS is one way that developers can get applications running faster than the old school way of having to buy infrastructure and handle that all by themselves. So, as this transition happens, designers are becoming more and more important to answer the questions of what do we build and why are we building it. Because as designers, we have to be really good at dealing with ambiguity and asking the question, why? All right, so now you guys are sold on creativity, everything's good, but there's some conflict. And the conflict in this case is that figuring out why can be very difficult. So this is bonus point time. Does anyone know what product this is? Abby knows. What is it, Abby? Cooper what?
It's Kubernetes.
What is Cooper what? Kubernetes. Kubernetes is an open source system for automating the deployment, scaling, and management of containerized applications. You guys got that? So Kubernetes was developed by Google and then open sourced. And Apprenda is now integrated with Kubernetes, so we've made a big bid on this technology and we're very excited about it. Essentially what it does is, there was the old way of building apps, which was to have a monolith, have one big app with your database and everything all wrapped up. And the new model is to have microservices, which are small pieces of an app that are independently scalable, independently updatable. But when you've got all these pieces, things can get a little messy in terms of managing them. So Kubernetes steps in to do that. I think of it kind of like a sheepdog herding all the little containers. And so why this is relevant, why I'm talking about all this, is back in May, I started working on Kubernetes as the lead UX designer for this part of the product, which is the UI, which is called dashboard. And when I started, I felt like there was this impossible gulf between what I knew and what needed to get designed. And this, not this specific issue, but this type of thing was what started the entire idea for this talk, is getting to the first step of a UX design project and feeling like, am I too stupid to do this? Is this just beyond me? Like, I don't understand what these words mean and how these things interact. And the reason for the talk, Ready, Set, Go, is that it sort of felt like, all right, now design happens, right? We've given you this prompt, now go off, do the thing, and then give us mock-ups so we can execute from it. And so there was this pressure to do design, and yet I lacked a lot of the understanding about what was going on. And I didn't want to just be a pixel pusher, yes man, like, all right, tell me where to put the button, and I'll make the best looking button I can. Because that's when you end up with like Dilbert type products, right? You have designers that don't really know what's going on, but they'll play around in Photoshop and sketch till the cows come home. So that was the challenge that I was facing here. Pressure to go, and we were dealing with an existing product. That dashboard already existed when I came onto the project, so it wasn't like there was a whole discovery phase for a new product. It was just one feature at a time, and there was the assumption that designers working on it would know, well, what a lot of this background information was. So that was the genesis of this talk. All right, so I'm going to share some process tips now. We're going to go through an exercise that all relate to figuring out why as the first step of a UX process. So quick poll. Who here has formal education as a UX designer? Either human factors or... Okay, so a couple. Awesome. I don't. I went to art school. And when I came out of art school, I originally had this imposter syndrome of, you know, I don't know what all these words mean, and I'm going to say something stupid in a meeting, and I'll just create an insecurity. And kind of phase 2 from there was to say, well, I realize all the answers are in books, basically, and I could kind of replace not having a real UX education by reading a lot of books, consuming a lot of YouTube videos, and then I'd be set. And now I'm kind of entering into a third phase where I think all of those resources are super important, but there's also a ton of value in my kind of unique, quirky, dorky take on things. So the idea behind these principles that I'm about to share, these process tips, are that they're pretty general and you can take or leave them. So as I'm talking, please think if there are things you disagree with, if there are things you agree with, if there are specific implementations that you have a different take on, because I would love to hear people's thoughts toward the end. We'll have time for a little bit of Q&A, just around these tips and what you do differently, what you do similar. Cool? All right. So tip number 1, engage stakeholders. And I realize this is pretty jargony, but stakeholders just means people who will be impacted by the project. So the number 1 stakeholder for any project is the users. Yes, great. That's an encouraging response. So user research is its own talk. If you want to learn more about user research, talk to Becca Kennedy. That's my covering user research. But getting anyone who will be impacted by a project in the same room, preferably physically in the same space, to talk about what their concerns are, what the business needs are, what the technical constraints are, is super useful and basically means that that meetings are a good thing from time to time. I know meetings get a lot of hate, and people are like, oh, kill meetings, they're bad for productivity, but there's so much value to be gained. By getting people in the same room and giving them a chance to actually voice their concerns and talk about this thing here. My friend Beneath likes to say it's all about dialogue. I'm a UX design team of 1 here at Apprenda, and I can say that listening well, really intently listening, is the most important skill for succeeding as a UX design team of 1. And I think this ties in directly with that stakeholder conversation. It's bringing people together. Why are we doing this? And establish that as the very first focus. And introduce to those stakeholders the wonder that it is design thinking. And this is from Zerb, I forgot the attribution, but design thinking is about opening up the problem, so you haven't introduced any solutions yet, you're just talking about what are the parameters here and what possibilities exist. And this relates back to that slide about the uncertainty of business and how designers are being brought in more and more to the strategy side of things, because we're really good at asking what if, kind of abductive thinking, pulling things apart. All right, so now it's time for our activity. Post-its and Sharpies were promised, and we've got those on deck. I think we can do per table pretty much to work out as a group size. And what's going to happen here is we're going to go through an exercise that serves as a great way to get people talking in a stakeholder meeting early on in the process, and having those conversations, visualizing ideas. Has anyone ever taken part in a Google design sprint? Have people heard of the term? Melissa, you have? So it's a cool way to rapidly, it's a 5-day process. And this is not quite the very first thing we do, but it's unlike the first.
Try to get this out of the way.
Day, and what's going to happen is we've got a basic map here of our user and the path that they're taking. So we've identified, this is just the world's most massive design team. Terribly, inefficiently massive, but we're gonna try this. So we've identified, we've kind of talked about what the challenges that we're trying to solve. So the long-term goal for this product we're building is getting non-traditional students who wouldn't otherwise to apply to higher ed institutions. Is that accurate? Okay, so that is our goal. Everyone get that? Non-traditional students who wouldn't otherwise to apply to higher ed institutions. disclaimer, this is an actual problem that's being worked on by New Ed, which Jackie is with, and Craig is the CEO over there. Say hi, Craig. Thanks. In thinking about ideas for this, what friends do I have in interesting industries? I was like, oh, Jackie can talk about this. All right, so that's our goal. And we've kind of mapped out here as a design team the basic path that a non-traditional student needs to take. A non-traditional student, they conduct a web search of different schools, maybe have some program keywords. They probably would go to the website of a specific school, check out the different programs there and see which ones they like. And then would inquire, they'd reach out, send an email, jump on chat, get some more information, and finally get apply. And now I've brought in Jackie as an expert in higher ed and all things that relate to this process. And what you guys are going to do is use a note-taking method called How Might We. Does everyone have a Post-it? Or multiple Post-its and a Sharpie? All right, beautiful. And at the top of your Sharpie, write the letters H, M, stands for How Might We. Just kind of small, as a reminder that that's how you're starting this statement. And then, as Jackie and I are dialoguing back and forth, and this will probably go on for like an hour in the real sprint, but we're just going to do like 5 minutes. As you hear things that are interesting, that might be worth pursuing, write those down in the form of a question. So if Jackie says, students typically don't trust higher ed institution website information, which I don't know if that's true or not. But if she said that, you could say, you've already got how might we on your Post-it. So you could write, how might we win over non-traditional students' trust? So there's a reason you've got big chunky markers and tiny little Post-its, so that these are just simple, hippie, to the point, and effectively what you're serving as is an investigation team. You're trying to dig into what Jackie has to say to make sure that this map is complete and that it lines up with reality. And then, I don't think we'll get to this today because it'll take too much time, but then these notes would serve as further direction for sketching. So you would pick kind of as a team, hey, we had a couple of themes here, people identified that they thought this was a promising direction to head in, and then you can do sketching based on this. Is everyone clear? You're doing really well so far. I see a lot of One question per Post-it. Yeah, great question. So write out a Post-it, tear off another one, write another Post-it. No pressure, just keep burning through them. So you should have several by the end of this. And
cover slide.
1 minute.
Oh, nice. And you guys know what you mean by non-traditional students, right? Okay, someone who's probably a little bit older, maybe they're going back to school, so it's not the 18-year-old out of high school. It's someone with different life concerns.
All right, Jackie, where in this process do students typically get most frustrated? Where are they most challenged with this?
So the biggest challenge in program search is around comparing programs. The typical websites, there is a long list of programs. You can scroll through them, jump back and forth between different schools. Once you get to those long list programs, you have to jump back and forth between different program pages and check. And then figure out where to go from there. So it's kind of an open path and not so I know
Okay, thank you. Order of my questions here. Is there anything missing from this map that we, as a design team, forgot to include when we were mapping out the steps?
Sure. There's so many schools with similar programs, so instead of knowing which one is the perfect fit, we'll probably loop around and go back to local schools. When you're in this process, before you hire, you want to understand the cost, and especially for non-traditional, this is going to be one of the most important things. So you'll want to compare costs between different schools and understand what other financial aids would be able to help. So that will probably be more before reaching out. So.
Very cool, thank you. And can you help us understand what prospective students, prospective non-traditional students are most concerned with, what they most have on their mind when they're going through this process and thinking about going back to school?
So their most important pieces are really it's worth it to them. So the reasoning for going back to school is because they stopped short too early and finish their degree. So the issue there is, will it fit into my current schedule? Is it going to get me to the next salary range? Is it going to get me to the next job title that I want? And can I take it at night? And what else that I've done in the past and be qualified to help out?
Great, thank you. And one last question. What's the biggest misconception prospective students have regarding the application process?
I think for non-traditional students, they don't realize how much they can get credit for and discounts for their past experiences. So if they went right into the military after high school and then got into their career, there's a lot of discount rates, a lot of opportunities that you can get money off for school. Past exams that you took or experience at work, and even like partial association degrees or something like that. So the misconception is that there's a lot of extra money that they could get discounted. So it's a lot cheaper than they would.
Thank you so much. Give it up for Jackie, please. The idea here is we had an initial idea. We're designers, so we don't know everything about higher ed. So we brought in an expert and asked her some questions to kind of check the level set here with her. And we've kept it low-fi intentionally. So these don't look like digital products, Post-its, Sharpies. They're cheap, they're expendable, they're physical, they're tangible. What we're going to do now is, with your group, which is your table, 5 to 8 people or whatever, and does everyone have dots? Becca's distributing dots. The next phase for this, I wasn't sure we'd have time. You're all doing really well, so we're gonna keep going. We're just gonna ride this. Find an empty spot, a pillar, the wall over there, really any place. A pizza box will work, and take your Post-its and kind of talk about them as a group and say, all right, this one is create a site that compares sites, compare sites, okay. And maybe discuss with the other people at your table something. A similar one, if you have duplicates, put those next to each other. And try to kind of group them by basic themes. And then what you'll do is the final stage. In order to decide which ideas are most worth pursuing, everyone gets 2 dots, doesn't matter what color. And you'll vote on Post-its with those dots. So you can vote on the same Post-it, you can vote on your own Post-it. hopefully out of that kind of gets generated is a consensus about these are the ideas that are most promising based on what we heard from the expert, based on what we have here as our user's story that you can then pursue later. So go ahead, stand up, find a exposed spot of walls, remember where it is, and we'll go for 5 minutes. We'll go for 5 minutes of this. So let's try to move pretty quickly. Everyone just have dots around.
Also, the UMass is like
Yes, I'll send you a letter. I'm going to kind of circulate around here and check out some top ideas. So for team, yellow, post-it, classic yellow. This color. Yeah. So they have compare programs. How might we compare programs to make it easily comparable? And how might we make it worth coming back to school again? For example, transfer credits, scheduling, promotion, flexibility. So those are great. Those are perfect duration of how might we post it. It's very concise. It's very general. Yeah. Were these? I saw some groups that you guys were groups by certain cost, encouragement. So, how might we showcase costs and financial aid better for students? The bigger problem is students, the bigger costs. Right. So that gets 4. Okay, that's the winner. Alright, so let's circulate back to our seats here. It's a great time to grab more pizza. If you need energy after that, creativity takes a lot out of you. And if people kind of get that, any questions, quick debrief? Did anyone have any concerns, questions based on that process? And then what you would do is you've got your prioritized, most promising things to pursue, ideas to pursue, that you've taken notes on. And these then will be the prioritized ideas that you explore for the sketching, prototyping, the whole rest of this. Yeah, so Mike asked if one of the steps would be to condense, and probably not at this stage, but definitely by grouping. So if you've got two that are pretty much identically the same, which a lot of people have, just kind of put them right next to each other. This group had reducing costs, encouragement, and comparability. So they were able to bucket down all the ideas they came up with into those 3 categories, and they all sort of fit within those. And this is, do people kind of see the advantage? It feels a little awkward at first. How might we? It just seems like a sort of rigid way to phrase something. It's something we would say in conversation. But it's this was developed by P&G in the 70s and then adapted by IDEO. And I really like it. It gives you a prioritized list to work from rather than just having a sheet of notes that's just kind of a mess and you don't know what is the top priority within that. So cool, that went well. Thanks for making that successful. All right, so that was point number 1. We've got 3 more. We're going to go through those pretty quick though. These are just going to be rapid fire. So engaging stakeholders, that was what just happened. Defining the problem, not the solution. So this, I now always require that there's a design brief, and that can be something that I make and other people agree to, but there has to be some established, written thing to work from. You're like, oh, we're agile. schedule. I thought we didn't have paperwork. Well, it doesn't have to be a product requirement, doc. It doesn't have to be something heavyweight. There does need to be something in writing that you can look back to. And integral to defining the problem is defining the solution. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. In defining the problem, this kind of relates back to design having a seat at the table, design having a voice in the business conversations that are taking place. The design in design-centric, forward-looking companies is less of a service. Like I mentioned before, it's not just, okay, we figured out what you need to do, now do the UX thing. And integral to defining the problem, this is the slide I was talking about, is defining success. The practical reason for this is, as a designer, if we haven't defined success before I start, I have no ammunition for defending my designs. So the CEO comes in, doesn't like the pink, but the pink is getting rave reviews from everybody else. If we fail to identify which of these sample metrics we were tracking toward, my hands are kind of tied. All right, I'll make it blue, like everything else. So picking which, kind of back to the original target you're aiming for, is a critical step to get established. And finally, learning the business. I know you're not supposed to have even numbered points, but I had to include this fourth one. Larry Burks talked about this at the last meetup, which is really cool. And there's, should designers code? I don't know, but I think what's not negotiable is that designers need to learn the language of business. As we talked about, design is becoming more important to business strategy and business discussions. And as design tools become more and more automated, the pixel pushing is still important, but it's less critical. It's more important to have designers that are comfortable exploring problems and figuring out that how and why and what, rather than the how. Greg Petrov, who I had a quote from earlier, said, "A designer's role is going from one of a craftsperson to that of an innovator. So less just kind of making stuff and more being involved in the innovation process." This is IBM again. I love IBM. There's no longer any real distinction between business strategy and design and user experience. And this is, of course, kind of them sucking up the design. I don't think they're quite there yet. It's really trying to say design is core to your strategy these days, but it's encouraging to see that an enterprise at IBM scale is making those kind of public statements. And that's something that's really cool about Apprenda, is the business transparency that happens, that leadership is very open with our finances, we're struggling. We had our quarterly kickoff today, our year 2017 kickoff, and the amount that's shared, I'd say is one of my favorite things about working here, that there's a trust level that employees should know what's going on in order to make smart decisions. All right, so wrapping up in conclusion, creativity is important, especially in UX design and enterprise UX design. Creativity requires figuring out why first. You can't just be creative in a vacuum. Design your own process. The steps I recommended were engaging stakeholders, defining the problem, defining success, and what was my last one? What was it? Learn the business. I was testing you. Good. And finally, I'll add, be curious. And this wasn't, I didn't talk about this, but I think giving yourself permission to be curious, even if it's not explicitly relevant to the thing you're working on, is really important. I did some work with Craig on New Ed, and that process was really fun. Just kind of asking him about any and all things higher ed, even if they didn't relate to non-traditional students, even if it didn't relate to what we were doing. It was just the process of learning about that whole world and kind of allowing myself to be interested in something. And this is a picture of me in Iceland a couple months ago, which I wanted to share because it's really cool and pretty badass. And also, it sort of comes from the same place in me to be exploring and doing cool adventures like this and to be designing experiences. So if I had $100 million in the bank, I probably wouldn't work at Apprenda, but I'd still be solving problems, I'd still be learning about things, I'd still be exploring. And I think it's really important to avoid burnout, to be asking those why questions. That curiosity will help you get to the reasons for why you're doing things, help establish that why, and that's going to then in turn lead to the best design solutions. Thank you very much. As I was talking, do people do stuff different than those process steps that I outlined? The same? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about kind of the prioritization of the whys, so which whys are the most important. You guys here are trying to, for instance, calculated and uniform way of rank ordering those whys, or somewhat subjective kind of prioritization.
Yeah, great question. So how do we prioritize which whys are the most important? That's a question effectively. I think for us, defining success is integral to that. So when you know what you're aiming for, what the business goals kind of come first, right? So alignment between me as a UX designer and the product team, the executive team here. What are we trying to get to? What are we trying to accomplish? And that kind of unlocks that paralysis of not having whys. Once you know what success looks like, your priorities will start to fall into place. Does that make sense? Does anyone have anything else they'd add to that? And really, you just got to ask. You got to ask why. What product of ours is the most important? And that's a really hard conversation to have. Companies like Google go through that exercise. Like Google's gamut of products that they have, what do you think is number one? Search. Yep. They've got dozens of successful products, but they still need to pick what is our number one red flag, so that's search. Other questions, thoughts? Yeah.
What is the, maybe it hasn't come up, but we have experiences where when you are serving stakeholders, maybe business stakeholders, their needs are different from the actual end user needs. So how are you balancing that?
Yeah, Mike had a great question. How do you balance, sometimes there are differing, competing needs, right? So sometimes business owners have different considerations than users, and they're out of alignment. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think as a designer, the more dialogue you can get going, the more, I think that's one of the big reasons to get people in the same room is that typically it's not that they're trying to walk over somebody else or do something on a power trip, it's just that they don't really understand that the users don't want this. So as a designer, you can be kind of that translator, the middle ground to say, you know, it's never too early to start doing user research. You can pull in some user research and say, I found this guy on Craigslist and he doesn't like your idea, or some kind of validation of some metric you can tie into the process of this is who you're trying to reach. Joe, non-traditional student, and Joe, non-traditional student, doesn't really care about whatever So there's a limited amount you can do, but yeah, I'd say kind of dialogue is.
Well, it's that, I guess if they don't have user data to back it up, they don't know that anyway, maybe you are just using it and saying, this is what I'm finding. And that would change.
Right, yeah, saying sometimes they're just ignorant, right, and you need to educate them. Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, sir.
I would just add that sometimes the users are the ones who are wrong.
Yeah, that's true too. Sometimes users are wrong.
Because people don't know what they want. Like, the business may have ideas for like a revolutionary way of doing something, but if you have to use it before you have something to show them, they'll just look for things that already exist.
Yeah, that's a really good
So
point.
that's what makes their job really hard, is trying to navigate all of that.
Yeah, do people get that? So sometimes users don't know what they want.
So when you test them, how long do you?
I would say you can make some educated guesses up front as a user experience person talking to the business people about what might work and might not. Then the sooner you can get something from actual users and get some preliminary feedback, the better. And if you can communicate that well with the business side of things, you can maybe get somewhere with it.
Yeah.
But again, like that's a big challenge with being user experience people. Just balancing everybody.
Yeah. And testing is so easy these days with tools like Vision, and they've got a new integration with usability or usertesting.com. You can just quickly test stuff. So there's really not an excuse not to user test. Yes.
Why should not be asked just once at the outset? Because an answer to that why might has other questions. More whys as you work through the process, keep asking why. You want to go back your iteration, and you want to throw something out that doesn't work. Creativity, iteration.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. That why is not a one-time thing. You ask why, and then, all right, that's locked in, that's what we're doing, we're shipping it. You've got to, even if it's costly to throw away what you've done up to this point, it's going to be less costly than kind of pushing that, polishing that turd and getting it to market. Yeah, very good point, thanks. Great.
So, great job.
Thank you.
Especially great job mentioning new ad things. Outstanding. I wanted to mention that, I guess I saw through your presentation how critical it is that, you take a disciplined approach to this, because like especially starting as we started new ed, it was me and one other person, right? Well, first it was me and you for a little bit, I think, just kind of throwing ideas back there. But especially like as you get one customer and you have one source of revenue coming in, that can so vastly sway the direction of your design and the way that you configure things. It's like the steering wheel just moves so much with the slightest touch. Because there's that. I think that's an especially dangerous time for a business when everything is dependent on that first client, and then as you grow. But if you maintain the discipline to bring in multiple perspectives like this that you shared, that can be incredibly valuable. And as you grow your base of customers, it will be more applicable to others and your benefits.
Yeah, great point. So Craig was just saying that it's dangerous to kind of rely on one customer for all your data. If you're you want to rely on one user, so you wouldn't rely on one customer either. That some diversity there is important. But also to counter, at the same time, one is infinitely better than zero. So one is going to point out a large percentage of the problems, and you don't need to validate with quantitative. All right, one person hit their head on that door frame, so we're going to have to send through another 20 people. After one person hits their head on the door frame, that you got to do something about that. I saw the other hand. Yes.
My question is, if step one is engage the stakeholders, how long does that process usually take, and how can you tell when you've gotten past the point of just having stakeholder ideas, complaints, information, data, and when you're really approaching an action and insight? Because I think that's the goal of the design process, is the insight about what shifts someone's behavior from going to a place and leaving to go to a place and staying.
Right, so asking, how do you know when the engagement of stakeholders stage is over? Was there another piece to that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can't get the insight. You don't
You can't get
get
the
the
what?
insight in stage one.
Oh, yeah,
You
yeah.
get information, you get sort of user ideas and requirements and things like that. But how long do you spend in stakeholder engagement, and at what point, how can you tell as a designer when you have a real insight as opposed to just a requirement, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts about this, but how do you know when you've got the idea that's worth pursuing, right? So you've got your stakeholders together, you're having a conversation. You as the designer, the design team, kind of serves as the moderator for that. And essentially, I showed that diagram of design thinking where you're opening up and you're considering a lot of possibilities and you're just intelligently brainstorming. You're not just throwing things out there, but you're brainstorming with purpose. And exercises like this are a great way to pick then promising insights and ideas to pursue. So the way it should work is we've had our initial idea. This is kind of like a funnel. We had a really broad idea. I brought in Jackie to narrow that funnel a little bit more so we're not missing any corner cases. Bring in another expert, talk to Craig. Hopefully at this stage we haven't missed anything. We're still moving forward. And then we as a design team generate a bunch of ideas based on that. So kind of the funnel just got bigger again. And then we're honing in on a couple key directions, ideas to pursue. And then we'll test those. So we might prototype one or two of these and see which emerges as the more promising. And if all those kind of dry up, we'll rewind to where we have some more ideas and then go through that same process again. Does that make sense?
It's pretty iterative.
Yeah, so it's iterative. You don't have to get it right the first try. Anyone else have any thoughts for? Because that's a great question. How do you know when you're ready to move on? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit about the difference between finding needs versus finding preferences. You ask me questions like, well, I prefer it this way, or I prefer it that way, or I prefer it this way, but they're telling you their preferences, and then you're trying to get at their needs.
Yeah, that's really
You're trying to get at the core need. So, and if by the same topic, you're asking subject matter experts, you're sometimes asking something, a question, and trying to get at the meaning. You're telling me about wording.
Yeah.
I'm not asking about wording. I'm trying to get more meaning. What's having meaning? Wording, nothing.
Yeah.
It's easy. Crystal clear what's the meaning. So, what I do is I always try to reset my mind to be the version end user. Or stay on the job.
Yeah.
My product should be absolutely self-explanatory. It's always self-evident, requiring no instructions at all. Ideally.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I think it's important to see the end user in their creative environment.
Yeah.
I'm the designer product used by people all over the state. And you're designing something, and you have an idea that they're sitting in maybe at a clean desk in a clean room or whatever, and maybe some of them walk. Now, other people, stuff is falling down around them.
Yeah.
Bouncing a laptop on a stack of papers.
Yeah.
You don't know. Some people have all the time in the world to do their job. Other people have the same job role, but they're totally overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So, it's good to see different end users in their own habitat.
Yeah.
See how they actually work, a variety of
Yeah.
their actual core needs, and try to be always emergent.
Great thoughts, Mark. Yeah, so Mark was saying the importance of asking, of not just getting opinions from your subject matter experts, but really digging into All right, so they want a mobile-friendly app. Well, why do they want a mobile-friendly app? Are they going to be doing this out in the field? Do they not have access to a desktop computer? Why? What's the reason behind this? And then also testing with real users, talking with real users and getting their, kind of keeping in mind their actual setting that they'll be using this product in. Yeah, cool. Yes?
From your beginnings to engage stakeholders, you alluded to the idea that meetings are costly.
Yep.
What techniques do you use to design meetings, or what pre-works you do, or any other techniques to make user research or stakeholder research best?
Yeah, great question. So how do you, meetings definitely naturally tend toward being unproductive, I think. If you don't do any work, then you're just kind of like, hey, let's get together, sync up on this, right? So there takes a lot of intentionality from the part of the designer if you're orchestrating this as you're bringing people together. Sprint, honestly, the book that this exercise came from has a lot of good insights around brainstorming productively, doing meetings productively, but yeah, I think as you hinted at, doing as much homework as you can ahead of time, so you're kind of prepared for this is what we're going to cover, this is what the goal of this meeting is, and then have a clear outcome. Treat it like a little mini design project that what are we looking to get out of this? We are establishing a common, agreed upon problem. So that kind of is where you would start, and then meetings after that can be, we are checking back into that problem to make sure everyone still agrees with the progress we made, the ideas we're pursuing make sense in that light. Does that answer your question? Cool. Anyone else have any thoughts or ideas with that?
Add to that, when I've experiences like this with stakeholders, like having a structure is end-to-end really forces you to keep to it, so that you keep ideas moving, because otherwise people just sit and get stuck on things. And that's where the meetings can become really productive.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Parkinson's law, is that right?
Yeah.
Tasks fill the time that they are allotted. So you guys had like 5 minutes and you kicked ass with this task. So I would say keep things really short, keep people on task. Don't give even yourself too much time to work on things. Give yourself, all right, like we got a week to pull together the entire first understanding phase of this project. The sprint format is 5 days. So this exercise is a component of day 1. By day 5, you have a working prototype that you then test with users. So, if for no other reason, check out the sprint format just to see how you can accelerate through that and really quickly test an idea. All right, we'll take one more question if anyone has one. Or no, just wrap up. Yes?
Yeah, I noticed when you pulled up the whiteboard with basically the user flow that you were kind of going for, I was struck by that because I thought it was kind of limiting, and maybe it narrowed the perspective of the problem too much. Because the initial problem, as you were talking about it, describing it, was basically, how to get what was the phrase?
Non-traditional students.
Non-traditional students,
to an
which is kind of a meaningless phrase, but that's the exact point. How to get non-traditional students to kind of make their way through the chain of events to where they ultimately connect with you and hopefully apply to whatever your school is. But when you have the diagram there, all of a sudden you focus on the diagram as the problem. The real problem is the layer more abstract.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, in your process, do you often try to step back from the way you frame the problem? Because we frame the problem that way, and therefore all our sticky notes are responding to that, as opposed to the more general problem of how do we ultimately get them to apply or to get interested or whatever we want to focus on.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. So maybe we are solving the wrong problem, potentially. So the way I kind of intended this exercise was like a cooking show, like, and now I'm pulling it out of the oven, and it's almost ready to go. That we'll assume there's some kind of backstory work that happened to get this piece established. So this should be trustworthy. And another point you had, that this is a little bit overly simplistic, which it is. Typically there'd be some branching lines, right? Different decisions can happen, different players can come in. But essentially the formula is you have your actors on the left side, and then they go through a set of steps, they follow a story, and on the right side you have an action, you have an end event. So for a school, you've got the student, you've got the admissions counselor, you've got the, help me out here, Craig, what other players do you have? Financial aid people. That web can get a little bit complicated, so I wanted to restrict it just to the student themselves. But yeah, that's a good point. And there's a lot of work that has to go to establishing that to make sure that's accurate before you can get to this, or it's all going to be kind of jacked up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, thank you very much, everyone.